Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making one of my favorite warm weather summertime treats, saffron ice cream. Now this ice cream is pretty easy to make. It's actually a creme anglaise base, and what it is when you make an ice cream from a creme anglaise base, it's called French style ice cream. And French style ice cream differs from American style ice cream in that French style ice cream is cooked and that it has eggs in it. American style doesn't need to be cooked. It can be, but it doesn't have any eggs at all in it, and that's usually the biggest difference. And then there's also other varieties of frozen desserts such as gelato, sorbets, and hopefully we'll get through all of them this summer on my website. So I'm looking forward to doing a lot of frozen desserts. Now, saffron ice cream came around when I was in Rhode Island living with my roommate, and she had a friend that went to India, and she came back with a bunch of saffron. And, you know, being Americans that don't have any roots over that area, we didn't really know how much saffron we could possibly use in how many different ways. So we just came up with different ways of using it, and one of my ways was ice cream. Now to her, it was a little unusual because saffron for her was typically used in rice dishes. But it comes out really great, especially if you've never had saffron before, so then you don't have that kind of background, the whole it should be rice background. So it's actually really tasty. I compare it to like having kind of like a caramel, rum, raisin, vanilla flavor all kind of wrapped into one. It's a very interesting, very complex flavor. And the best part is you don't really need to use a lot of saffron to get a strong flavor. And that's because saffron is just such a strong herb that you only need to use like 3 or 5 strands to flavor this ice cream. Now this ice cream base, the French style ice cream base, which is basically just creme anglaise, can be used to make any flavor ice cream you want. You can make vanilla, cinnamon, chocolate, whatever flavor you can think of, as long as you somehow incorporate that flavor into the creme anglaise. Now, some of the flavors, such as chocolate especially, you will have to adjust the recipe on your own. Eventually, I'll have a chocolate ice cream recipe on my site. But just keep in mind, because chocolate, it has so much fat in it and it's such a hard component, that sometimes you may need more liquid. Or you can just adjust the recipe. You can also just use soft ganache, which is basically just heavy cream that was boiled and used to melt down the chocolate, and you can use that, and hopefully that'll make sure that the consistency of your creme anglaise is still the same. But eventually I will have a chocolate ice cream recipe, so if you're looking for that, don't worry. But otherwise, this recipe is pretty easy to customize to whatever flavor you're looking for. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Okay, so for one of the first things you need to do is you need to separate some eggs. And you need to separate 10 eggs. We need 10 egg yolks. So to separate an egg, you just crack it open. Pull it slowly apart. Looks like this shell broke a little bit, so I will use a different one. And you just pass it back and forth between the eggshells. Now, since it's not like a buttercream, if you watch me separate eggs for buttercream episodes, you know that we have to separate the egg whites as cleanly as we can, so that way we don't get any egg yolk in the egg white. But in this case, we don't really have to be as careful. We can have some egg white, but it's more important to have more egg yolks, obviously. So don't worry about separating it so cleanly. If it breaks or something like that, you can still use it. Just try to get out some more of the egg white. But other than that, it's pretty easy to separate them. And you can also save the egg whites for later. If you do separate it really cleanly, then you can save these egg whites to make buttercream. Otherwise, you can use it to make an omelet or for some other purpose or some other use. Alright, so in this pot, I have 8 ounces of whole milk, 1 pound of heavy cream, and 3 ounces of granulated sugar. And I'm just stirring it together so that way the granulated sugar dissolves a little bit. And we're also going to add our saffron. Now, I know I said earlier you don't need a lot of saffron to flavor it. You only need like 1 pinch, which comes out to be like 6 strands if you count them out individually. And if you've never seen a saffron before, hopefully it doesn't get too blurry if I'm holding it too close. It kind of looks, I don't know how to describe it really, what it looks like. They're very bright red, and it's going to impart a very orangey yellow color to your ice cream. It's not going to turn red. But it definitely has a very warm, earthy flavor. And it's not like earthy like cheese or brie, because sometimes people describe brie as being earthy, but it has a very nutty, vanilla-y flavor, and it's just really good. So if you've never had it before, you got to get your hands on it. If you've had paella, then you kind of have an idea of what saffron should taste like. Because usually the paella has a saffron flavor to it. Not always, but sometimes it does. Anyway, so what I like to do is I like to add a little bit more just to give my ice cream a pinch or a kick. All you really need is this many to flavor it. At least that's how me and my roommate started out. But when it comes to frozen desserts, sometimes you typically want to over flavor it just because the coldness of the dessert will cool off your mouth and make it less sensitive, so that way it doesn't interpret flavor as well. Also, I have a tendency to over flavor my stuff, so I really add a lot. So I'm actually going to go ahead and triple the amount. But even still, considering how much I have, it's not really that much. Another thing to consider too is a lot of you might be a little hesitant to use saffron because it's so expensive. And you're probably wondering, like, well, how did he collect so much saffron? Well, think about where saffron comes from. It comes from the Middle East. So the best way to get your money, more for your money, is to go to an international market that specializes in Middle Eastern cuisine. I got like this much saffron for like $7. And it may sound like a lot, especially since you can get like a big old thing of oregano for like $3 something. But consider going to the grocery store and trying to get your hands on saffron. You'll probably get like half this much for twice as much. So just keep that in mind. Spices are usually a lot cheaper if you buy them from international markets, especially the ones that are harder to get your hands on. So we're going to go ahead and bring this to the stove. We want it to boil, but I'm going to do it very slowly so that way the saffron has time to infuse. And this is a great time to add flavor as well. You can steep in tea, cinnamon sticks, whole spices, whole herbs, however you want to do it, over the stove, and you can just let it cook and steep for a good while. I would say 10 minutes max. And you can do longer if you want, but 10 minutes should be where you're aiming for. Otherwise, you're just using up a lot of your time. So meanwhile, while that's steeping on the stove, this is typically when you would separate your eggs. But I like to skip ahead in the episode so that way you guys don't have to sit around a lot. But anyway, this is when you would separate your eggs, and then we're going to add some more ingredients to the eggs. So to the egg yolks, let's go ahead and add another 8 ounces. Well, this is the other 8 ounces. The first 8 ounces went into the pot. So we're going to add 8 more ounces to the recipe by putting them with the eggs. And then 3 ounces of sugar. So remember, there's 3 ounces in the pot on the stove, and there's going to be 3 more ounces in here. And once you have the sugar added, you want to go ahead and whisk them together because you don't want the egg yolks to chemically cook because of the sugar, which will make them grainy, chunky, and just unpleasant. All right, so we have all of our ingredients weighed out, so we can go ahead and, well, we're actually just waiting for the saffron to steep. So give it about 10 minutes or so, and then we can go ahead and bring it to a boil. One other thing, too, is you might want to know is if you try to flavor your ice cream or sorbet, sometimes sorbet if you're making sorbet with like wine or an alcohol, you might have some issues with it freezing because alcohol, if you drink alcohol, you know that it doesn't really freeze. You can store alcohol in the freezer, you keep it cold, and it doesn't freeze. So keep that in mind if you're making ice cream. You probably won't be able to add a lot of alcohol. So if you were looking for a very strong flavor relying totally on alcohol, it might not be the best route to go. Okay, so my saffron has been steeping on the stove for about 10 minutes or so. You may notice that I've added a little bit more saffron, and that's because I realized that my saffron is actually like 3 years old, so it's actually pretty weak. You know how dry herbs and some dry spices, they lose their strength after about a year, even 6 months, depending on how it's stored. So I noticed that it wasn't really contributing a lot of color, and I couldn't really smell a strong saffron flavor, so I went ahead and threw in a little bit extra. And if it's overwhelming with saffron, it's fine. It's for me, so I won't mind. But just keep in mind that you don't need as much saffron as I have in this pot. You probably wouldn't even need about half as much as I have. But anyway, sorry. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring it to a boil. Okay, so once your milk comes to a boil, now we need to temper the eggs. And to temper your eggs, tempering your eggs is a method of incorporating eggs into a recipe, like a custard. And what you need to do is you need to continuously whisk your egg white or egg yolks. Slowly drizzle in the hot liquid. And what this does is it helps prevent your egg yolks from cooking and turning into scrambled eggs. Because what you're doing is you're slowly heating up the egg yolks. So just keep doing this until all of the milk is mixed in with the egg yolks. Okay, and then you want to pour this back into the pot. And bring it back to the stove. So you can see that the saffron and the egg yolks combined give your saffron ice cream a very yellow color. But what we're doing now is we're slowly heating it up. I cut the heat down to about medium high, and we're slowly going to cook this up so that way we don't scramble it. And we want to cook this, if you want to use a thermometer, you want to cook this between 175 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you go past 180, it's okay, just hurry and take it off the stove. But 180 is about the temperature that this mixture will turn into scrambled eggs. So you want to get it as close to 180 as you can, so it's a nice, thick, rich custard. But you don't want it to like curdle and to turn into scrambled eggs. You want to continuously stir it so that way the heat is being evenly dispersed throughout the entire liquid. Especially since this is so deep, and there's so much of it, it's not heating up as evenly on the top as it is on the bottom. So we don't want the bottom to burn or turn into scrambled eggs. Now, meanwhile, while you're doing this, you also want to have your bowl ready that you're going to store this in the refrigerator, because we need to cool it down before we can turn it into ice cream. And it should have a sieve or a wire mesh strainer in it, so that way it can strain out the saffron and it can strain out the any curdled egg if there is any. Okay, and it's almost there. It's getting pretty thick. Another way you can tell without using a thermometer, though if you're doing it for the first time, I definitely recommend using a thermometer so you have an idea of what you're looking for. It's also called, 180 is called nappe. And what nappe means is to coat the back of a spoon. So that way, what it's basically saying is as the custard warms up, it's going to get thicker and it's going to stick on your wooden spoon more and more, instead of just running right off. And so when you get to nappe, you really should be able to blow into your spoon and get like a rose or carnation pattern. So we're almost there. So if you have an ice bath, that would work wonders. But if you don't, it's okay. And as you can see in the bottom of the pot, it already started to coagulate a little bit. That's okay, I expected it to because it's so close to the heat element. So we'll go ahead and strain this through. And if you have an ice bath, especially if you're going a little bit over than temperature, the ice bath will help cool it down and prevent more of the egg yolk from coagulating. But that's okay if it's coagulated a little bit. And if you have an ice bath, that would be ideal. And what you want to do is you want to cool it over the ice bath until it cools down. But we're going to cool it in the refrigerator. So let's go ahead and refrigerate this for about 1 to 2 hours. Okay, so once your ice cream is nice and cool, we can go ahead and put it on the mixer. Or your ice cream maker, whichever method or way you're using it, or way of making ice cream. My ice cream bowl is actually a KitchenAid attachment. This piece in the middle, that's looks like a paddle, or the thing that's actually doing the mixing. It's called a dasher, and it's specific to ice cream making. So first thing we want to do is we want to put it on a very low speed, and we want to go ahead and add in our cool filling, or base. Okay, and we just let that mix up for a few minutes. Okay, now if you can notice, you can see that our ice cream base, or French vanilla ice cream base, or French ice cream base, has actually grown a little bit in volume, and that's called overage. What is happening is air is being incorporated into the base as it's being mixed. Now we've been mixing for about 15-20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and take it off the mixer and let it freeze all the way in the rest of the freezer. So we'll go ahead and stop it. Now you can serve it this way if you wanted to. It's more like soft serve ice cream, so it won't really hold its shape. Now ideally you probably want to use a paper carton. Oh yeah, it's actually very, very thick. So you could probably serve it right now as soft serve ice cream. So you may want to use a paper carton. That's what we used in school. I just use plastic. It's fine. I don't find anything wrong with the plastic one. Once you've gotten your filling into the container you're going to store it in, you want to quickly get it into the freezer so it can continue setting up. Before you do that, you want to clean off any ice cream that dripped on the side, of course. But you also want to put in a little piece of parchment paper right to the surface. This is going to help prevent any ice crystals from forming on the top of your ice cream. And once it's frozen, you can pull it right off. So let's go ahead and freeze this. It should be ready in 4 hours, but I'm going to freeze it overnight. Okay, so our ice cream has had a chance to freeze overnight. So we can take off the parchment paper. Comes right off. And we can go ahead and scoop our ice cream. Okay, and there's our saffron ice cream. So it has the same kind of texture as ice cream. It's a frozen dessert, and we made it homemade. Okay, so that's how you make homemade French-style ice cream or saffron ice cream. Now remember that this recipe can be changed to any flavor you want as long as you have an oil or a spice to steep in, tea, or however. It's very easy to flavor and customize your own way. So don't be afraid to try other combinations or however. Also keep in mind that I used my KitchenAid ice cream maker attachment for my mixer. So depending on your ice cream maker, you may have different freezing times. This one took about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes even if you really wanted to get it nice and hard on the mixer using the ice cream maker. So depending on what yours is, the timing may be less or maybe more. Also, keep in mind that you can freeze it overnight for best results. That's what I did. But it should be ready in 2 to 4 hours too, especially if you've really frozen it really well on the mixer. So anyway, I hope you learned a lot today. Thanks for watching. And remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.